Welcome back. We are now on the home straight and starting off our final session of the day. We have Paul Smith, who is Director of Strategy and Technical Services for Salix Finance. Now, Paul leads Salix's energy and carbon team, working with the public sector to reduce carbon emissions through investment in energy efficiency and heat decarbonisation. Paul is a qualified electrical engineer and obtained chartered status in 2001 before completing his MBA in 2004. Now, prior to joining Salix, he had 13 years' experience with two large international engineering companies, namely Rolls-Royce PLC and FKI PLC in the energy field. In these roles, he worked overseas in the Middle East and China, as well as throughout the UK. Since Paul joined Salix in 2007, the company has grown from engaging with a small pilot of 19 clients to work with more than 2,700 public bodies and enabling them to undertake more than 21,000 energy saving and heat decarbonisation projects valued at £2 billion. So, without further ado, let me introduce Paul Smith to our virtual stage. Welcome.
Good afternoon all, and thank you very much for being invited to present at another public sector event. It's a real privilege. So what I want to quickly cover this afternoon is just a number of successes that the public sector has been delivering with us for the last 3 years, say a little bit more about what we do, update on the recent scheme, which is a public sector decarbonisation scheme 3B, and then say what's coming. So we've got some important news today to share with you on 3C and also the recent work that we're doing with the Scottish Government. So if I could have the next slide, please. So the work that Salix does is supporting the public sector. We've got a long history since 2004 of working on loans. So we've done a lot of very simple cavity wall, loft, building management projects, LED lighting, data center work. And that was the initial work that we did with public sector bodies all over the UK. Since 2020, we've then had a real focus on the decarbonisation of heat. And with the decarbonisation of heat, there comes some more challenges, and we've moved from a loan-based scheme to a grant-based scheme. So the public sector decarbonisation scheme, we've now had 3 phases of that, and the most recent was 3B, where we've allocated about 590 million of funding, and our clients are also bringing a further 400 million to do about 900 million of projects in total, and that's about 230 projects across 190 public sector clients. We're also doing a number of low carbon skill fund projects where we're helping clients to really develop and design new projects that they can bring to Salix for future funding, or they can look at other alternative lines of funding. We also have various programs with the Scottish and Welsh governments. Next slide, please. So the challenge that we're really seeing in the last few years is how to deal with the heat in the buildings. And what we're trying to do with our client base is to take a whole system approach from the building. So we're looking at all the energy that the building's using. We're seeing, is there opportunities to reduce that energy? Is there further sort of controls and insulation that we can embed and embrace within the various buildings before we eventually are moving from, say, an oil heating base or a gas heating base to a low carbon heating base. So we're looking typically at moving to air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, or district heating connection solutions. And then on top of that, clients are also looking at other opportunities such as their electricity use within their estate, and they're also looking to try and perhaps bring some renewable energy online as well. Once they've done that, then they really are trying to get to a low carbon heating solution for the lifetime of that building going forward. Next slide, please. So the typical low carbon heating solutions that the clients are in the end aspiring to get to, there's really a whole array of heat pump solutions that we're seeing, and the heat pump agenda is really, really increasing in appetite and interest across the public sector. So for the 900 million of funding, including the client's contribution that we've just seen for the last phase of the public sector decarbonisation scheme, 3B, we're seeing air source heat pumps out of maybe more than 400 million of spend. For water source heat pumps, we're seeing about 40 million of spend. For ground source heat pumps, we're seeing 100 million of spend. We're also seeing 60, 70 million of connections to district heat pumps. So of the 900 million of funding that 3B is supporting with the client's contribution, we can see the emphasis is really on spending in the low carbon heating as the majority area. The next slide then shows a little bit of the other areas of spend. So of course, what clients are trying to do is to reduce the amount of energy they need. And one of the best ways to do this is to look at the fabric of the building. So again, we're seeing the usual runners and riders, the cavity wall, the double glazing, there's internal and external insulation, there's floors, roof, and various arrays. So again, the majority spending we're currently seeing with these schemes is the glazing. Now, a lot of the windows are at a stage where they do need replaced, the air tightness. So there's great opportunities and great investment going in glazing, as well as your typical cavity and loft solutions. Could I have the next slide, please? One of the things that we really try to bring to the table with our client base is really great case studies. And for Salix, we do try to encourage our clients to come up with great sharing platforms and great knowledge sharing platforms of projects. So this is a typical example of a school that we've just done, where they're looking at air source heat pumps along with solar panels, along with LED lighting, along with double glazing. So they're going for the whole building approach, not just doing one measure in isolation. So you can see that for a 2.4 million grant value, this client is saving about 400 tonnes per year, and has also an annual financial saving of their energy bill projected to be in the range of about £200,000 per year. So this is an excellent case study of what a client can do with a building that's using an old fossil fuel heating system and moving to a new low carbon heating system. On top of that, if we just look at the next slide, then we can see that looking, from our Salix website, we've got a whole array of case studies, and these case studies really set out to the different client bases, be it a school, a hospital, a university, or local authorities in their estates, what can be done within their estate to help move forward to the net zero agenda. We also look at lessons learned. So if I can go on to the next slide, then we can say a little bit about what the key learning and the key challenges are. So what we've found in the last year in particular is clients are applying when maybe there's still more design work to be done. So getting their costs right and getting their engineering right at that stage is quite a challenge. And we do appreciate there's a balance between what's sort of pre-tender, what's at an early design stage, to what the final solution is going to look like. We also see that there's clearly, pressure for the timescales for delivering these projects. And a success of the most recent scheme is that we had good levels of funding to allow clients to spend in the second year of their project as well as the first. And in fact, for phase 3B that has just been awarded at the beginning of this financial year, we found that actually the allocation of the year one funding was used up before we had year two funding all allocated. So that meant there was opportunities for clients to almost profile their work to not have to be done as quick, to take the pressure off the timescales, to take the pressure off procurement. The other area that we are supporting and looking at is the move to low carbon heating generally means an increase in the electricity supply. So there's lots of engagement that needs to be done with your local distribution network operator. So we're looking at, how much additional capacity do you need? What are your current voltage levels coming in? Do you have your own substation? Are your fault levels going to suggest that you need to do a massive upgrade? So that early engagement that we encourage our applicants to do really helps to get the whole balance of the project and the whole challenge and the whole risk of delivering the projects within the timelines that the projects need to be starting at and then completing at. In terms of the governance of the projects, if there's better accountability, if there's better risk assessments, and if the client has the opportunity to put in more project management to control and deliver their project, then we find that the project governance leads to more successful outcomes. The final area that we are looking and learning with our clients as we go along is some of the supply chain challenges. So we have seen tremendous increases in funding for the public sector and in the area in general for the low carbon heating, such as heat pumps. We're seeing similar areas for insulation. So again, the supply chain is really ramping up and looking to understand better the opportunities and how they can deliver in line with the funding that's available. So if we move on to the final slide, I think what's great timing today is at lunch, or at 2 o'clock today, we were able to announce the next phase of the public sector decarbonisation scheme. So in announcing this scheme, this is the third of 3 phases for phase 3. And all the application forms, all the guidance, a whole host of webinars are now live and posted on our website. So there's a great level of information that potential applicants can go and look at and start to really build an understanding on what they need to be doing in terms of putting together an application. We've announced it earlier, we've announced it before the schools break up, so that will allow the schools and the local authorities some time to make provision and start to do some planning. And what's quite important is that the application window will not be opening to the autumn, so say around October time, dates still to be finalised. So you've got many weeks to start to understand the criteria. The phase 3C is very similar to 3B for those that are familiar with what was asked around this time last year. And you've got many weeks to build your case, put an application together, get your budget prices, start to do some design work. In addition to what we're doing for majoritively in England, we've also just announced and jointly supporting what the Scottish Government's doing with their Scotland Public Sector Heat Decarbonisation Fund. Very similar lines along with the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme in England. And that's just an announcement at the minute. We are still working up the final guidelines and the final application form, but our website will shortly have additional information posted that, again, the Scottish client base can look at. So for the work in Scotland, where it's really focusing on 2 main areas, and that would be the local authority base, and that would be the university base. And within local authorities, there's the opportunity for schools as well to be involved in this scheme. So 2 new schemes that have been announced this week, along with lots of great success of what the clients have already been doing in the previous scheme. So all in all, a very positive and a very good news story for the public sector in general across the UK. So that's me finished. I'm happy to leave it at that. So thank you again for all your help and all your great work. I'm looking forward to seeing lots of exciting new projects in the autumn for 3C and also for the work we're doing with the Scottish Government. Thank you.
Smith there, and lovely to end on a good news story, and that leads us nicely into our next panel. This is the penultimate panel of the day, EV infrastructure, sponsored by Believ. Now, the topic of electric vehicle infrastructure is an important one. We've already been kind of circling around this subject matter, but here is a place where we can really delve into it further as the country seeks to transition towards a more sustainable transport system. In this panel discussion, we will explore the current state of electric vehicle infrastructure, including the challenges and opportunities facing the industry as it seeks to expand and improve its network of charging stations, striving for those net zero targets. We'll also be discussing the latest trends and innovations in electric vehicle infrastructure, including the development of fast charging technologies, the expansion of public charging networks, and the emergence of new business models and partnerships in the industry. Participants will also learn about the regulatory and policy frameworks that are shaping the electric vehicle market and the role that public and private sector stakeholders can play in driving the transition towards electric vehicles. Well, let me introduce our panel. We've got a fantastic offering this afternoon. We have Matt Croucher, who is EV Services Director at Believ. Tracy Milmore is Senior ZEV Infrastructure Development Officer, Transport for the North East. Matthew Ralph is Innovation Charge Manager at Nottingham City Council. Robert Paul is EV Infrastructure Service Manager. Ryan Robertson is EV Infrastructure and Roads Assets Officer. And Peter Brown is Head of Public Charging Policy and Infrastructure Strategy at the Department of Transport. Welcome to you all. And as always, I'm sure there'll be questions that we'll want to be putting to you. So just to encourage all attendees to use that Ask Your Question, and I will try and keep my eye on those questions coming in. But first of all, it's always great to just learn a little bit more of what you're doing, and in particular, what your focus is when it comes to EV infrastructure. So why don't we start with you, Tracy? Oh, Tracy, we can't hear you. I think perhaps you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes, got me. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Tracy Milmore. I'm the Senior Infrastructure Development Officer for Transport North East. I previously worked for Durham County Council for 4 years doing EV infrastructure, and I've just recently moved over to Transport North East about 8 weeks ago. So we now provide, in my new role, we provide strategy and policy advice for the North East region, we lead into the Joint Transport Committee. But in my previous role, I've got 4 years experience of doing electric vehicle infrastructure projects, installing EVs in the North East area, in Durham area, particularly for residents without a driveway or a garage to charge an electric vehicle, and looking at those types of areas and how we can bring more EVs into the area and allow people to use that infrastructure. So I've tackled many difficulties with it, which local authorities and public sectors do. With one of them being without a driveway, but also working with public sectors and getting that infrastructure built in. So hopefully I can help today.
I'm sure you can. Thank you, Tracy. Matt, what about you?
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Croucher. I'm the EV Services Director here at Believ. My background is I've been working in the EV space since 2009 now, previously as the Zero Emission Mobility Lead at WSP, a transport consultancy. So my background is as a transport planner, and I couldn't quite resist giving it a go in the end at a charge point operator, trying to deliver on those charge points that I spent a lot of time advising around previously. And my role at Believ is, I think, a really exciting one. So I work to grow our network. And a big part of that is to understand the market, understand what our clients, so local authorities and businesses want, what the opportunities are in the market to continue to develop and evolve our offer. And in terms of Believ, so we're one of the fastest growing charge point operators in the UK. We've got over 1,000 sockets nationally now. And our mantra, our kind of raison d'etre is that we believe in cleaner air for all, fundamentally. And the way we look to try and play our small part in delivering that is offering a fully funded solution to roll out the full range of EV charging solutions. That's anything from a slow lamp-on charger to a fast charger to a rapid or an ultra rapid, across the full range of sites, so on street or off street. And that's backed by our owners, Liberty Global, who own Virgin Media O2, so a lot of pedigree in the on-street space, and Zook via the SIF fund from the Treasury.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Next, let's hear from Robert.
Hi, Rob Poole. I'm the EV Infrastructure Service Manager at Barnet. So I've held this role for about a year now, but prior to that, I was working in sustainability more generally, and so sort of managed the EV side, but not as hands-on. So at Barnet, we're sort of, I think, one of the leading London boroughs in terms of rollout. I think I'm not 100% sure on the numbers, but I think so. We're very focused on ensuring that a one-size-fits-all approach isn't sort of implemented across. So we're very focused on a range of solutions. So that includes our lamp columns, but we've also been sort of pioneering a bit more in terms of charge points and Trojan energy charge points, and a sort of a range of solutions across the board.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ryan. I'm trying to make through, Robert, trying to get through everyone here. Ryan, over to you.
Hi there, Ryan Robertson, Robert Ryanson, either East Lothian Council EV Infrastructure Officer, Road Asset Officer. I've been with the council, just checked LinkedIn, 2 councils, this and the previous one, for about 15 years now, increasingly with electric vehicle infrastructure in the last 3 or 4 years. So we design, build, finance, operate public chargers in East Lothian, which is, in English terms, probably a unitary authority. We have about 100 and something thousand souls, and we do everything from providing permission for or providing guidance on cable covers, shortly hopefully cable gullies, 7, 22, 50, 150 kilowatt, and shortly even a 200 kilowatt output charger. So the whole kind of spectrum of charging powers, up to 200. Might do megawatt standard one day if there's tend to be a market failure, but that's really our role, to do what the commercial sector hasn't yet done. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ryan. Matthew, I think you just joined us. You might not have heard my question, but it was really just to get a sense of what you do and what your focus is currently with infrastructure.
Yeah, so I'm Innovation and Change Manager at Nottingham. And one of my focuses really has been on electrifying our own fleet and sort of understanding the difficulties that would bring for the commercial sector when they're looking at electrifying their fleet. So we're really looking to sort of push the boundaries of when it comes to sort of specialist vehicles. So we've got the first fully electric sweeper, cage tipper, minibus in the UK. And the reason we were sort of making the first step, I guess, is to say, okay, well, what does it take to charge a HGV? Well, now we've got 20 of them. So what does it take to charge 20 HGVs in a city centre? Is it possible? And then we're now looking to sort of roll out that learning to the public with some of our public infrastructure, and making it accessible for commercial vehicles as well as residential.
Brilliant, thank you. And last but not least, Peter, obviously I read out your title, Head of Public Charging Policy and Infrastructure Strategy at the Department for Transport. So I imagine, there's a lot that you're looking at, but I wonder, what is, I guess, a national priority at the moment? What would you share in terms of your focus?
Thanks, Gaita. Yeah, absolutely. And I've been here for the past sort of 3 years, so been able to experience quite a lot. And as you mentioned, I was one of the officials responsible for not only writing but also delivering the EV infrastructure strategy that sort of set out our national vision for the EV infrastructure space out up until 2030 and also beyond, which I think was really important just to really be able to communicate that to industry as a whole and provide sort of clear roles and responsibilities that we in central government sort of expect from our local authority partners, but also our distribution network operators on the energy side, and of course, charge point operators more on the transport side as well. And I think that was a really big sort of step change and really gave a lot of clarity to industry, not in terms of investment, but also in terms of what they should be doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think that work has really crystallized what I'm doing at the minute, which is really trying to sort of scope out barriers as we sort of transition to mass market EVs and making sure that there's that sufficient charging network for everybody all across the country. So a lot of my focus now is really weeding out those specific barriers and making sure that government makes changes where it can and really steps out the way so industry can continue to deliver. We've got around 44,000 public charge points, which is absolutely excellent. But I'm very much aware that only sort of not even half the job done as we sort of build out to 2030. And one of the key sort of barriers to more people changing to EVs is making sure that there's a reliable EV infrastructure network around them, not only where they live, but also where they drive to. and visit. So that's really our focus. And we're working very closely with sort of Charge UK, the new trade association at the minute, on sort of outlining what those barriers are and what we in terms of government can do about those. Because as I said, we really just want to get out of the way and let industry deliver. So if anybody on the call today, whether that's on the panel or also just attending, has any evidence of barriers that is particularly sort of holding up their delivery of their own projects or projects in their areas, then do let me know, because now's the time for me to sort of gobble up all that information and try and ensure that you've got the tools to deliver.
Well, I mean, I think that's a great place to start. I don't know if there's a queue of people wanting to tell Peter what that might be, but would anyone like to pick up on that in terms of barriers?
I mean, certainly I can comment there. I'm sure others may want to as well. But I mean, just to kind of offer I guess a charge point operator's perspective on it, as I kind of mentioned in my kind of little trail at the start about kind of who Believ are and what we do. So we're kind of out in the market at the moment, able to offer a fully funded or work with grant funding where local authorities have secured that to roll out charge points. And I guess a barrier can sometimes be around things like we're kind of seeing with the Levi program at the moment is obviously a certain amount of needing to get ducks in a row in terms of getting strategies in place, the application process complete. Appreciate there's a lot of work to be done there, that's both resource intensive and technically challenging for a local authority to be able to work through all of that process. And so inevitably, whilst it's obviously a good thing that this funding is there to help kind of ensure we've got a good coverage of charge points, I think inadvertently it can impose some delays in kind of work jumping through the necessary hoops to unlock that. And I guess from our perspective, we'd be happy out there deploying now. And so I guess a plea from my perspective would just be anything we can do collectively, and we're certainly happy to help in this regard, is to try and not kind of put up lots of barriers to getting that funding flowing through and charge points getting delivered.
Yeah, I suppose picking up on that, I suppose as is ever the case with new or technologies, expertise is really sort of the issue, particularly within local authorities. And I think the expertise that there is very focused within London and within the southeast. And outside of that, and further to the north, there isn't the same level of expertise or funding. I'm not really sure what the solution is from a government perspective, but I suppose that would be one of the key issues.
Brilliant. Would anyone else like to chip in? Tracy?
Yeah, I can come in here. I mean, barriers from the local authority side. I think, we have these car parks that are local authority owned where we do want to put charge points, but there's resistance from internally. The amount of car parking spaces some people feel like they're giving up car parking spaces because are the amount of EVs ready there for the number? Do we put 10 charge points in when there's 20 spaces? Is that too many at this moment in time? Do we need to go in at a smaller approach and put 5 there because there isn't enough EV cars to fill, and would we be sitting empty? But at the same time, the funding is available now for us to build that infrastructure. So obviously it's kind of a catch 22. We don't really know what to do. We don't want the EV bays to sit empty, but we want to be ready for when they are to be filled up. So it's kind of waiting for, do we catch on to that funding now, or do we build them, or do we go at a progression rate that's in line with the cars that's being bought and just slowly put in 1 or 2? Then once those 1 or 2 are being used, expand to 3 or 4 and go with that passive infrastructure. And that's kind of what personally we're leaning towards. Also as well is we kind of have some areas that aren't commercially viable. So we will have charge points in some of our car parks that are nearer residents' homes and not in those city centres that would get used a lot. And our charge point operator is willing to go in those areas where there isn't that call, yes, this is going to bring in X amount of money, because it's a slow intake. They will be used eventually, and we think they will be used, and so we need the charge points there. But at this moment in time, they might be abandoned until that gets to that time.
And Ryan, I think I saw you nodding there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's key. The word like think or believe. we don't know what success necessarily looks like. It could look like multiple different things within an area, or it could look very much like one thing in one area and one thing in another area. And people don't necessarily know what solutions are available. Maybe the right solutions don't exist for all the right niches yet, but we've got, pretty good stuff to be rolling out at, increasing scale. As Tracy says, whether you restrict X the number of bays to one use or not is contentious. But there is a lot of suppliers now who will work with local authorities to install chargers that don't require any particular traffic regulation order. So these things can go in and not be perceived to be restrictive of parking.
Brilliant. Matthew, is there anything that you'd like to add?
I was just going to say about on the commercial side, even installing on commercial buildings, our council owns quite a few commercial units, and we don't currently install charge units as a sort of matter of course, because it doesn't quite be. It's still not accepted that sort of electric is the future, even on small vans, and I think even in some of the government documentation, it's still sort of technology agnostic, and I think that's allowing some people duck that difficult decision, I guess. And when you're looking at installing charge points or per vehicle that you need to last sort of, there's a lot of sort of kicking the can down the road, rather than this is why we've been investing in this since 2016 to say these do work and the payback is there and they can do the job today. Stop thinking about it and do it.
That's great. Thank you, Matthew. And it would be great to get your reaction, Peter, perhaps to some of those points. But before you do, just to say to anyone who's joined us or has been with us for a little while, if you've got any questions that you want to put to our panel, do use the remaining time to do so. And I'll try and put those questions to our panelists. Just use the Ask Your Question box. And Peter, I mean, obviously there's a lot there that was brought to you. You asked the question and you got the answers, but I wonder if there's anything that you'd like to comment on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm always happy to get some of those answers because that means we've got that sort of correspondence and communication channels open, so never a bad thing. I mean, I suppose the good thing is a lot of those issues are things that we hear sort of quite regularly. And I think we do have quite a lot of different aspects sort of in place to deliver on some of those issues that were raised. So first of all, obviously, I don't want to keep going on about it, but the EV infrastructure strategy really did sort of set the tone for a lot of sort of communication and also commitments that are still continuing to be delivered by central government in this space. The second thing that we've got is funding. So Tracy and a few other panelists mentioned the local EV infrastructure fund, which is delivering direct investment, both capital and resource funding, which is particularly important to local authority officers. And we've also got quite a lot of guidance out there as well. And we do have support for local authority officers through our partners at the Energy Savings Trust, who deliver and sort of share more broadly best practice and sort of tangible examples of EV infrastructure going out in various different areas sort of across the country. So that expertise is getting shared. And I think it was something that Robert sort of raised. So I think that's part of the solution. We've also got subnational transport bodies developing their own strategies and offering extra resource to sort of areas in their jurisdictions. So that is taking place. Really keen to pick up the point that Ryan mentioned around sort of traffic regulation orders being sort of a key barrier and being one of those more micro issues that we face, something that's very we're very aware of, and we're collecting sort of specific evidence on that and trying to plot a way forward to remove that barrier. And as Tracy said, sort of commerciality and understanding sort of rollout is particularly important. And I think, really understanding what solution is best for which area, which Ryan started talking about, is particularly sort of important. So what will work in central London won't necessarily work in a rural area in sort of County Durham. but there's definitely lessons that can be learned and shared across the board. And I think some of the funding from the local EV infrastructure fund will be particularly important in addressing some of those areas that aren't sort of yet commercially viable. But as I mentioned in my sort of opening remarks, I think it's really important that consumers have that infrastructure in the ground so they know they can make the transition, and will be able to charge wherever they are.
Yeah, thank you. We've got a question that's come in, so I'll read the question, then as whoever feels they want to answer, just chip in or put your hand up and I'll come to you. And Paul asks, on-street charging has many issues. What is the expectation on how charge points be reserved and avoid ICE cars blocking the spaces?
I can come in on that one a little bit. I was just about to kind of do a little bit of an answer in the chat there. Without a TRO, a traffic regulation order, we can't stop bays being blocked from a local authority side. These TROs cost money to put on charge on car parks, and they take time to progress through and put through. That's the only way we can prevent petrol or diesel cars from parking in those areas. And if there's a TRO and a clear sign up on the car park that says like what the electric EV charging bay is there and it's for, and there's clear signage, we can stop that happening by ticketing and putting a notice on. But without that, we can't do that. Like I say, a TRO has a cost implication to put on each car park, and they take a certain amount of time to go through the system. So it's just another added thing that, yeah, we will always put the charge point in and see how that goes, and if it ends up being blocked and ICE, then we would get that TRO and push that forward. But it's another cost to inevitable EV infrastructure that makes it all difficult at this moment in time because of the prices of the electric costs and us trying to keep the prices down for residents. It's another battle that local authorities have to try and get over to prevent the end cost being to the resident, because we want to promote and have reliable, accessible EV charging. And as costs come in, to prevent that and make us have to put the price of the tariff up, people are reluctant and wanting to use them. So it's another thing that we need to work on. But the answers are there to do it. Should we able to? I hope that makes sense.
No, that's great. I just want to try and go through some of the other questions, just because we've got a few coming in. It's kind of just building on what we're talking about, really. This is a question from Kevin, who says, is there a reason why vehicle chargers designed to charge electric bikes or scooters provide a more integrated e-transport platform and promote a more integrated end-to-end active travel offering? Would anyone like to answer that?
I
can talk about integrated travel. Sorry, me.
I was just going to say,
go.
I was just going to say, I suppose, more about the size of things. I mean, we're very focused on in our borough in terms of a clutter-free solution and minimising that footway clutter where possible. So I suppose things like lamp-con charge points are a key sort of solution to that. Also, the flat and flush models, things like Urban Electric or Trojan Energy and things like that. And simply the size of the charging for e-bikes, e-scooters just makes it more feasible, more possible to have that wayfinding and those options. There are other charging solutions that make that viable. Things like the Jolt units, for example, which are larger advertising hoardings, or the larger rapid units, do make it more feasible for most.
Great. I think there was someone else who wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about our sort of integrated options, I guess. So, I mean, we're working quite a lot on this post-COVID, as people are working from home and hybrid working, so they're not, they don't need their cars 5 days a week. We see it as an opportunity to actually encourage people to, maybe get rid of their car entirely, because ultimately we don't want everyone replacing a car with an EV, because the roads really cope with the level of sort of congestion at the minute. I mean, in Nottingham, it costs us around 170 million pounds a year congestion. So to tackle that as much as the quality side. So an example would be we've a brand new car park to replace one that's at the end of its life. It's got 1,300 cars, but within that are 81 charge points, a cycle locker, the secure cycle locker for about 60 cycles, and there's e-bikes and e-scooter, shared e-bike and e-scooter parking outside with 2 minutes walk from a tram stop, train station and taxi. So that's some of the way that we're trying to integrate various travel options, and we're then rolling that out across our car parks and our residential schemes across the city, so that people have that travel, that they've got the option of going in. They've also got the option of getting rid of their car and using a scooter or bike or whatever works.
Brilliant, thank you.
I think if I may,
sorry, Ryan, go for it.
Was the public charge point regulations that there was a lot of buzz yesterday about should really help with this, I think, with open data, because we have hosted a trial of mobility as a service, which I think is really key here, because if you can have a one-stop shop for somebody's or multimodal journey, and they can pay for everything via one service, be that contactless or a particular mobility as a service app. That's really great. To make that actually possible in reality, we're looking at what we call journey hubs in East Lothian. Others, Como, for example, might know them as mobility hubs, where we just co-locate various multimodal interventions, apparatus, infrastructure at sites. So that could be like a big car park site with lots of different options, or it could be just like, a little village charging site, might not have any restrictions on it, but it might be next to a bus flag on a lamppost, and that is a journey hub. There's various ways to continue a multimodal journey through that, which might not require as much use of a car as traditionally.
Thank you so much. I've got another question that's come through, so I'm just going to go straight to it. This is from Origin, and Origin asks, as district councils, a part of the fleet is used by trade operatives, and generally the practice is for them to take the vehicle home as their workday starts early, and sometimes their service is nearby and the depot would be too far. But one of the hurdles we're facing is how to navigate it to adopt EV, as adoption of EV would effectively mean vehicles returning to the depot. So can someone kindly address this problem? If you face similar issues, how have you overcome it? I don't know if anyone's experienced this.
Sorry, I can probably chip in on it just to clarify. So the challenge here is this is a fleet vehicle that people are taking back home at the end of the day. Okay, so interestingly, actually, we're just in the process of launching some pilots around this under the guise of a group called Street Fleet, where we basically are looking to identify exactly that use case. We know there's quite a large segment of the fleet market where people do take their vehicles back without a convenient charge point located near the home. There's just no means of conveniently switching to EV for them. So we're happy to work with and looking to work with a number of fleet organisations and the host local authorities where those vehicles go back to deploy that on-street solution for a fast charger to enable that overnight charge. Yeah. So I think that's a solution. It won't work for every fleet. Every fleet's each fleet's got their own particular operational requirements. But I think that can play a big part in overcoming that challenge.
Brilliant, thank you. Sorry, go for it, Matthew.
Options as well, because obviously we've electrified over half of our fleet, and some of those are home starters. One of the things we've done is partnered with public sector organisations across Nottinghamshire and opened up our charge points to one another. And the public sector owns so much land that any of our houses are probably within 200 yards of some sort of public sector land, whether that has charge points on it. So, for example, the people who live in Mansfield but work for Nottingham City Council can now charge at vice versa. The other option is, we've talked about public charging network and is decent occupancy rate, utilization rate. For example, we've got EVs here, that we don't know where to charge. Coupling those two things together, live, and actually, is it within a Levi area, and can we sort of request a charge point in that area? We've done 10 of our home starters all charge using the public network, which helps our rates on that side of things. It means that we're not installing one charger on vehicle that's used, twice a week. It's available for everyone.
Brilliant. And Tracy, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to come in there and say that one of our North East councils, I don't know whether they've done it yet, but I think it was something pretty similar to what Leeds had done, where the local authority was offering to install an EV charge point at some of their staff homes, which they would get one charge point, and they were getting a charge point operator to come in and kind of pay the costs, so the member of staff wouldn't pay that charging, so that they could start from home. It was going to be something where they would get one charge point and one charge point only. So if they then moved house, then they would have to replace that charge point themselves, so to speak. It came with that, but it was something that a local authority I know were debating doing for their fleet purposes, so that they could start their fleet journeys and start their work from home in the morning, and that would be charged overnight. I don't know if they've done it yet, so bear with me, and I could maybe find that out whether that's happened, but it was certainly a discussion in one of our northeast regions.
I believe
Brilliant,
that's something private hire vehicle operators are also looking at doing, such as Alison Lee and Uber, etc.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, we have run out of time, but some real genuine solutions, hopefully, there to that last answer, and some incredible insights there. Thank you so much to Matt Croucher, Tracy Milmore, Matthew Ralph, Robert Paul, Ryan Robertson, and Peter Brown for joining us for that discussion. So we are going to move on now to our final panel of the day. It is on housing. Housing is, of course, a crucial sector for emissions reduction due to its substantial energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. Now, carbon dioxide emissions from buildings must reach net zero by 2050 to achieve an overall net zero. Replacing fossil fuels with low carbon heating, principally air source heat pumps, can achieve CO2 reductions of 90% by 2038, with further reductions as the electricity grid continues to decarbonise. However, retrofitting existing housing stock with energy efficient technologies, improving insulation, implementing renewable energy solutions, and promoting sustainable construction practices in new developments may prove too costly for local authorities and social housing bodies without support from central government. So really important area to get into for our final panel. So let me welcome our final guest today. We have Councillor Tom Renhard, who is Cabinet Member with responsibility for housing delivery and homes, Rob Smith, who's lead surveyor for Dacorum Borough Council, Martin Fletcher, who's Senior Research Fellow at Leeds Beckett University. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us. And it would be great just to start off with, a bit of information about what you do, and in particular, the connection to net zero and housing. Martin, let's start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having us on today. So my role, Senior Research Fellow, I work with the Leeds Sustainability Institute at Leeds Beckett University, and we specialise in building performance evaluation. And chiefly, we do a lot of work on retrofit of existing domestic dwellings, a lot of work with local councils in the West Yorkshire area. And most of our research centres on evaluating homes before and then after they've had a retrofit done to them, to look at how the improvements have impacted on energy savings, carbon savings, and also really importantly, what the occupants made of that change as well. So that's in a nutshell.
Brilliant, thank you. Very succinct. Tom, what about yourself? What do you do, and in particular, focus with housing?
Thank you for having me on. So there's a few key areas for us. So my role as the Cabinet Member as a political lead is to help give that political steer to the work that we're doing as a council. And I think that the thing that becomes quite challenging with it, of course, is that net zero and what we need to do to decarbonise cuts across so many areas. And obviously this session is focused on housing, but involves a lot of work with some of my colleagues. And there's two really clear strands for us. There's the homes we're building now, although they are a minor part of the challenge. Actually, most of the stock that we need to decarbonise is already built, and so we're looking at the moment writing a social housing decarbonisation strategy, which is going to set out what the Bristol standard is for new homes that we're building, whether that's through our housing revenue account that we deliver directly, or whether that's through Gorham Homes, which is our council-owned housing company that delivers homes through a partnership model. And we're always looking to see how we can improve those standards. But where we're really kind of focusing a lot of time and energy at the moment is decarbonise our existing housing stock. We've got a pilot of deep retrofit that's underway on some of our easy form properties in the north of Bristol, which is on some of our sort of most trickiest housing stock easy form properties to be able to decarbonise. Cost us over £40,000 a property to get them up to a good standard with everything that we'll be doing. But more broadly, we've also created an innovative partnership called City Leap, which is a 20-year deal that we have done with an organisation called Amoresco, to look at how we can decarbonise the city as a whole, and part of that being our housing stock. So we're working on plans to look at how we can decarbonise social housing. But as has been pointed out, we don't have all the money we need. It will cost us at least 80 million to get it to EPC for our 28,000 homes. To get it to net zero would cost 540 million. And that was calculations that were done in January last year before a number of events have taken place since. So we've got our plans in the works. We're using that to leverage in private sector investment, also to leverage in grants that is available from the government, from the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which of course has its challenges. Try and put all those pots together to go as far as we are able to within the resources that we've got.
Brilliant, thank you, Tom. And Rob, what about yourself?
Hi, yes, Robert Smith. I'm a lead surveyor for a local authority, Dacorum Borough Council in Hemel Hempstead, Hertfordshire. So I'm on the coalface really. So I manage and take part in all the maintenance programs for 10,000 stock of houses, which is a challenge in itself. And we're also doing the SHDF fund as well. So we're heavily involved in that with another 2 years worth of funding that's been forwarded on. But mainly my sort of area of research is in the thermodynamics of a building, and sort of looking to see what we can do to minimise energy wastage, but also improve the housing conditions down to mould and condensation, etc., that we are facing, and looking into the reasons why it's there, and more importantly, what we can do about it, because of our ageing housing stock, it's had a massive influence. And I think it's fair to say previous maintenance strategies haven't really taken that into consideration, and now we're paying the price. So that's roughly where I am at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you. And it'd be great to learn more about the thermal dynamics that you're talking about. Just to say, it's our last panel today. We've had so many fantastic questions coming through all day. But if you do have questions around this topic of housing specifically, do pop them in the Ask Your Question box. I'll keep an eye out for those and try and put them to our panelists. So first of all, Martin, a question for you. What role do occupants play in reducing the carbon from housing?
An incredibly important role. So it's all too easy to forget that the houses we've got, they're there for people to live in and enjoy, and we can't, unfortunately, science them out of the equation. It can't be a purely technical solution to using energy in the home. It has to bring the occupants along with it. It is a socio-technical conversation that we have to have. So if, for example, we're moving people from a Victorian mid-terrace to a passive house home with a mechanical ventilation system and a heat pump, you have to really handhold through that process to make sure people know how to use those systems properly, how to maintain them, because ultimately, otherwise, you end up with underperformance when systems don't get used as they were originally designed to be used. I'm sure Rob sees this a lot in his line of work when you spend a lot of money doing things to a home, and then you don't realize the benefits that you hope to see, and that's very often down to the occupant inside that home. And one of the biggest things is not to kind of go on a blame expedition and say, you need to do it this, you need to do that. It's to make sure that the kind of handover documentation for new technology is written for the correct audience, not a size 8 font technical language manual, but something that the layman can read and understand, so they actually have a chance in of using these systems correctly. But yeah, the occupant should always come first and foremost when you're designing these systems, and there's all too often a tendency to kind of top down this from an engineer's perspective. To kind of finish with a really small anecdote of the research that I've just finished, replacing some high-rise heating systems, so electric heating systems in flats with heat pumps, ground source shared ground loop heat pumps. They were set up with no internal battery, and everyone in these homes were in fuel poor situations. They put £10 on the meter. When £10 runs out, all the electric turns off and the system resets itself. So the internal clock goes off, the timer settings go off. So everything that the engineer installed when the system went in has now been taken back to factory defaults. Really simple example where the person wasn't thought of in that, and a simple internal battery in that system would have retained those settings, and the issue wouldn't have happened. So.
Brilliant, thank you. Is there anything that Tom or Rob might want to add in terms of, the role of occupants?
Well, yeah, definitely. It's one of the questions that I put forward originally. I mean, yeah, when we're advising tenants and residents, it's so important that we don't just hit them with a load of science and hit them with do's and don'ts. It's always do not do this, you must not do that. We need to make them understand what the benefits are for them by living in a certain way, and that's vital. And if anyone ever discovers a secret to that, I think it can really change things.
Yeah, really important point. Tom?
Yeah, I think I really agree with Martin. I think that the thing that really springs to mind is heat pumps and the way a heat pump operates versus gas boilers. It's not the instant hit, for want of a better term, that you get from a gas boiler, and the system is used very differently in order to get that heat and that more ambient heat and being on more of the time. And so it's going to be important that we make sure we take people on that journey when we're putting in these new systems. Otherwise, and we had this with a scheme that has gone in. It's on our district heating network as well, where a lot of the residents go, well, the heating isn't working, and it wasn't that it wasn't working; it was a different system. And but they were used to operating the system that they were used to having with the gas boiler. And so it's something that we really have to think about, how we do that education piece, how we work with occupants, with residents, as we go on that journey to using different technologies, and to the point that was said earlier, in layman's language, not like a really technical manual in tiny font. And we also need to think about that from a diverse communities perspective as well. We're making sure that the information is available in multiple languages as well. We have a huge Somali community, for example, in Bristol. So it's going to be thinking about multiple language use too.
Yeah, and I guess also, like you were saying, making it digestible, because there's so much that people are having to deal with at the moment in their lives, particularly now. So if it's not digestible information, you're just going to put it and just think, I can't deal with it. Let's move on. Robert, you made that point earlier about thermal dynamics, and I just wonder, how do thermal dynamics in social housing link with net zero and the net zero programme?
Well, the thermal properties of a building, they have a direct influence on energy consumption, sustainability, and resident welfare. And as I said earlier about our maintenance strategies in the past, I feel they've directly affected the living conditions of many properties today. Unfortunately, not always in a positive way, purely because we've installed double glazing, we've put composite doors in, we've blocked all our chimneys up. So, and then we've put these heater systems in that really, especially boiler systems, that really quickly heat the house up. Now, thermally, if there's no insulation in the buildings, which there quite often isn't, there's no heat retention of the building. So therefore, the heat is escaping quickly. Not only that, it's costing a lot more money, and we've got the fuel poverty thing now. And then thirdly, we're going to get a very cold wall, which is always the temperature of a wall will always be about 10% cooler than the air temperature, and therefore it will condensate. So once it starts condensating, it's like that for more than 24 hours, then your mold spores will grow. Hence, you're going to get these conditions, and that's where it all links in. So it's all right us putting in all these gadgets, but we need to make sure the building is capable of absorbing it and coping with the measures that we've undertaken. Otherwise, we're going to get problems, which we're seeing.
Yeah. And I wonder as well, are there any additional benefits from improving our housing beyond reducing our carbon emissions? Martin?
Yeah, absolutely. Rob's touched on a big one there, the health aspect. So if you have poor quality homes with inadequate ventilation and cold walls leading to mold growth, big impact on health. That's the kind of the biggest one at the moment. But you see a few other holistic tertiary benefits as well. So we've worked on some schemes where there's a knock-on effect on local crime rate, for example, which you wouldn't initially think. But external wall insulation in a kind of an area with high crime rates raised civic pride in that area because it totally changed the outlook and landscape of that local setting, where suddenly people started to take better care of gardens, more civic pride in the area, and actually saw a drop in crime rate in that area. We see it with schooling attainment as well. So you now have children living in healthier, happier, more accommodating homes. They get a better night's sleep, knock-on effects to their attainment in schooling. So yeah, health's the big one, but societally, everything starts at home really. So a lot of benefits.
Yeah. Brilliant. I was just wondering, because we mentioned it, and it is a hot topic, retrofitting, in terms of insulating homes, and as Rob was saying, looking at the stock that we've got and what we can do to ensure we're protecting it as much as possible. Tom, have you been retrofitting at Bristol City Council, and how do you evaluate the success of what you're doing as well?
So yeah, we have, and we've been retrofitting for a number of years and focused on some of the basic kind of more fabric first focused measures, often sort of no regrets measures as they're sometimes referred to as well. So if you definitely know you're not going to regret doing down the line, and we've had a program at scale for a number of years addressing that, seeing us spend over 40 million already retrofitting our housing stock. And now what we're doing is looking at how we can scale that up, because we want to get all of our stock to EPCC by 2030. I mean, we'd love to go faster, quicker, higher than that. Obviously, EPC has its own kind of debate as a measure as well. But what we're now looking to do is create this social housing decarbonisation strategy, working with City Leap, the partner that's going to be working with us to look at how we can really scale it up. Can we put solar PV on every single council house across the whole city of Bristol? That'd be something that I would love to do, as well as some of the other measures that we're going to be taking. How can we make sure that we've got the workforce there? Because I think there's a lot of talk about the ambition, but not enough kind of conversation, I think, around the workforce that we need to deliver all this work as well. And so one of the things that we need to think about is how we have more certainty of funding programs, across political terms. As well, the deal we've done with City Leap is a 20-year deal, for example. But why are small businesses and large businesses going to train up a workforce if there isn't the certainty of the funding of the work? And so I think there are certainly some improvements made to the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, for example, so that it's not kind of bitty and constant. That we kind of perhaps pool pots of money to apply for various things. So you've got sort of one more core pot that you can then draw down from. And that'll be some of the stuff that will help us to go further and faster. Some of the other challenges we've got, though, sit around the tension that has with fire safety at the moment, and regulations have moved on, rightly so, in fire safety. But what that means, one of the things we're doing with our high rises is there's a type of cladding which is not what's on Grenfell, expanded polystyrene system, EPS, and we have that on a lot of blocks. We're going to be taking all that off. And then putting a much better fire rated system on. But there's the challenges of while you're doing that work, or where you're cladding the blocks that aren't clad at the moment, in that it's very cold while the cladding's off when it's been removed before you put in the next on. So some of that we have to think about as well, because residents are have flagged to us, well, you've taken the cladding off, you're not putting the next lot on probably until the winter. And it's given us food for thought about how we're approaching some of those programs of work as well, to make sure we've got the resident at the centre of everything that we're doing.
Brilliant. On the retrofitting point, I've just seen a question come in, and Stuart says 20 million plus homes need to be retrofitted in a little over 20 years. And that is approximately one retrofit every minute of every day.
In my experience, no. Not at the moment. You know, there's a skills shortage. We need to address that. We need to train more people. And Brexit has had an influence, certainly on the labour force that we're seeing, and the lack of a labour force, and the expertise as well. You know, not just from the installers, but from the designers. So I think we're making big steps, big progress. I think the councils are coming into line and realising, and some of the housing associations realising that we've got to move on this. And as usual, we are normally a little bit slow, but once we get mobilised, yeah, hopefully we'll get there. But I don't think we're going to get there at the time.
Martin, you know, how do you speed this up then?
Well, one of the big so the public sector is actually well positioned because they have access to large stocks under control that they can generally benefit from economies of scale on purchasing and financing packages and access funding schemes like the social housing funds and earlier the ERDF funds. One of the biggest areas to try and get to is the able to pay people, so the mortgaged households, and also the landlords and rented households as well. So you've got many millions of homes where it's not really costed into the value of your home, the energy credentials of that home. You know, people will spend thousands of pounds on a kitchen or a bathroom. They're less willing to spend thousands of pounds on some fluff that lives between the two leaves of their brick walls. You know, that energy kind of aspect of the home isn't passed on to the value of that home itself. So as a homeowner, as a mortgage person, it's hard to kind of sell that. So that getting those financial levers in place wherever possible will be one of the main ways to kind of speed up the process.
Is there anything anyone else would like to add in terms of what might speed up the process?
I think we have to look at the resources available. We've got many different archetypes in our council that we own, and a lot of cross-wall buildings, which are basically brick and block on either end, and then just cladding inside. And in that we've got hung tile and literally plasterboard and stud work. There's nothing there now. The money it will cost to do that would take all of our maintenance budget for the year. So it's like, as Martin said, we can get, there's the funding. The funding's there. And then we need to get the resources and the manpower, you know, and we'll have a chance, and we've just got to keep plugging away at it and chipping away until we get there. But I'm not sure that we'll actually be able to achieve that, but I think we can be well on the way.
Great, thank you. I guess we've been speaking now in the last few minutes about retrofitting, but I wonder, you know, new builds. What role do they play when it comes to achieving net zero? Martin?
Yeah, they do have a role, but as other people have mentioned, I think it's sitting at roughly around about 80% of the homes that are built now will still be living in them when we get to 2050. So retrofit's the kind of the bigger thing to tackle, but new homes do play a part in that. And I think going beyond just the minimum requirements of building regulations, if we're serious about net zero, so the main volume house builders at the minute, not greatly incentivized to build any better than the building regulations minimum requirements, which will ultimately mean that if we were serious about net zero, we're going to end up retrofitting the homes that have been built in the last 10, 15 years because they're being built to an EPC level that in the future is going to be below standard, really, for a good quality net zero home, you know, suitable for a heat pump. You know, only really getting away from gas boilers, still not there yet. So there's a lot more capacity to do with new builds though, because you're starting with a blank canvas. So you can get those new technologies in place early, you can build them to a high standard correctly, and you can future-proof them. And it's not necessarily having to build them to net zero today. We can still build to a high standard using traditional methods, using a workforce that's trained to build using traditional methods, but we have materials that are better than just, you know, the minimum requirement.
And Tom, do you have any thoughts in terms of new builds?
Yeah, I think I agree with the points that have been raised. I think what I'd add as well is I think taking a look at your planning framework is a good place to start. I mean, we're in the middle of our local plan review, which is quite helpful. And we're thinking about, okay, well, what are we doing around heat hierarchy? And we started that review process in 2019, and it got paused. And so even now we're in 23, things have moved on hugely in the last 4 years. So taking a fresh look is one of the things that we've done to make sure we've got a planning framework that will require developers bringing schemes forward to be to the best possible standard, to make sure that we're trying to phase out gas boilers altogether. And there are schemes that are coming through now that are gas boiler free, that are making use of ground source heat pump or air source heat pump technology, which is really brilliant. I think as well, what we have to make sure is that doesn't come at the cost of less affordable housing. And this is one of these tensions sometimes when we're working with developers. It's sort of, well, you can't have it all. I kind of think, well, I can, and I'll try. Whether I get my way or not is another matter. But we have to think about how we make sure that all those things can still be complemented, and how much of that will be around, potentially increased subsidy or support from Homes England. Homes England grant you can draw down for affordable housing is only ever for non-Section 106 secured housing. So it's that the public need to see that there's a joined up approach when you're doing placemaking, when you're building to net zero, but also that's not coming at the expense of, for us in Bristol, we have a housing crisis, over 20,000 households on our waiting list for social housing. So they need to see that we're also building the social housing to that net zero standard, of course.
And Rob, anything you'd like to add?
Well, we're building new council properties all the time, not as many as we used to, but it's quite interesting that, because I did ask the question, why are we still installing gas boilers when we know we want to get away from that? And what it's saying is it's 5 or 6 years in the planning. We get a bit of land, we get it all planned and everything. So one of the things is now they will start looking at putting alternative heating systems in, and that'll be for 4 or 5 years' time. And the other thing is, maybe hopefully the government will come up with a strategy for what energy source is going to be the primary one when gas goes. Is it going to be electric? Is it going to be from wind turbines and other sources, or is it going to be nuclear fusion? Or is it? So if they can come up with, say a sustainably sourced way of producing electric, all of a sudden the actual energy crisis and the costings would drop dramatically. So I think maybe people are waiting to find out what that's going to be. So I'm sure the government have got something in mind on this, because we've got to move on from gas.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, we're coming into our last couple of minutes, really. So just to close this panel, I just wonder, if there was one sort of thing that you'd like to share, perhaps on a positive note, in terms of where you're seeing successes, where you are around this topic of housing, and in particular achieving net zero, what that might be. Martin, what about you to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. So the majority of my personal research is looking at thermal comfort and occupant well-being in homes. And I suppose one of the main takeaways that I've had from working in this area for nearly 15 years is the benefits that occupants do get from these housing upgrades through the retrofits. They often don't save money because they've got a limit of how much they spend, and they spend it either way. But they do from that take comfort from the energy staying inside their home for longer. So, they see a reduction in their mold and damp and disrepair claims. They get a higher level of comfort inside their homes, and it has all these positive knock-on effects for their lives and their life chances as well. So, kind of getting away slightly from the net zero discussion, back down to the smallest, the smallest dot on the map, the people inside those homes. So yeah, that's the positive, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Rob, what are your final thoughts?
Only really, it's a positive note that there's been a massive increase in awareness of damp and mold and what people are suffering. But more importantly, I think through research, I think might agree with this, that we now know that it's not their fault most of the time. The way their house has been set up, it's almost very hard not to get mold in certain conditions with financial restraints and things like that. So lifestyle is a taboo word that shouldn't be used anymore. And it's positive that people are now aware, whereas when I first started looking into this, it was like no one was interested, and now they know. It might have taken a tragedy for that to come across, but now we can actually move on it, and it's recognised. So that's a good thing.
Thank you, Rob. And final words to you, Tom.
I mean, I guess to add to what I've always said, I think, you know, that there's huge focus obviously on damp mold, which has been good. I think stronger regulation coming in is helping the sector to move on. So I think it isn't going to have the culture change it needs on its own, but you will get those organisations that will go ahead of others, that will, you know, we've already got schemes that are finished that have been gas boiler free, not the ones that are just entering. So some good stuff happening in that, and so much more happening around modern methods of construction and new build there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that fantastic